Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome back to our weekly COVID-19 press briefing with Montgomery County Executive Marc Elrich, our Health Officer, Dr. Travis Gales, and our Director of the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, Dr. Earl Stoddard. I am Lorna Vigili, Hispanic Public Information Officer for Montgomery County Government. I will be your moderator today. And for reporters, please use the chat, ask permission to record, and then your questions on the chat as well. With that, to you, Mr. County Executive.
Thank you. I was just seeing if I could get my phone to not ring during the time of this phone call. So hopefully I succeeded. So today's information, just begin the briefing. Our case count was 72. And our test positivity rate is 2.6. We're always happy with our test positivity rate, at least being in that range. And 72 seems to be an area that we've been bouncing around, sometimes a little higher, sometimes a little lower, but still above where we were. I think it's maybe almost 2 months ago now, when we reached kind of a low point. But we're not quite back to our low point yet. We have a modified executive order. Tomorrow the council will discuss some changes we've proposed to the executive order. The primary change impacts serving alcohol after 10 p.m. We're establishing a late night alcohol sales program that allows food service establishments with no prior history of citations or closings due to COVID-19 related violations to apply for a permit, which would allow for alcohol service from 10 to 12 p.m. The establishments have to opt into this program and cannot just start selling alcohol past 10 p.m. without a permit. And I'm going to let Dr. Stoddard provide you more details. But with the privilege of selling alcohol later are going to come some responsibilities. Yesterday in the world of testing, we tested 505 people. On Monday, we tested 728 people. Today we're testing at 3 locations in Gaithersburg, Wheaton, and Silver Spring. Tomorrow we'll be testing in Germantown and White Oak. And you can go to our website for testing locations and times. And I just got a mailer today for the first time, of the mailer with talks about Montgomery County testing and where to go get tests and when to go get tests. And we're encouraging people to get tested. This is really important. It continues to be the main means of our ability to get control of the virus. Because you can be positive and be asymptomatic, that means you can not know that you're spreading COVID. And we want to make sure that, that people are aware of what the situation is, so that they can, if they test positive, they can take themselves out of circulation, and we can begin doing the process of contact tracing so that we can get a handle on this. So this continues to be really important for our public health program. And we only succeed to the extent we can get as many people tested as possible. Without that, we'll continue to not fully understand the extent of COVID inside of our community. That's particularly important because if in the likelihood of a resurgence, we wanted to make sure that if that does come back, that the stepping off point for resurgence is as low as we can possibly make it, so that we're starting with as little community transmission as we possibly can have. So please go to our website and schedule an appointment. One of the good news about Montgomery County is we are the vaccine capital, apparently. Last week, Novavax announced that they're now in phase 3 trials of vaccine development. Novavax relocated to Montgomery County from New Jersey, has been operating in Gaithersburg since 1993. They are not only working on a vaccine for COVID-19, but also for Ebola, the flu, and infant respiratory virus. Novavax is one of the shining stars of our biotech economy, but there are many more. With companies like Novavax, the FDA and NIH located here in the county, we are being called vaccine capital. And that's a good thing to be called. In fact, Montgomery County companies account for 4 of the top 8 recipients of Operation Warp Speed funding from the federal government, totaling over $5 billion in funding that went to GSK, Novavax, Emergent Biosolutions, and AstraZeneca. Warp Speed funding is COVID-19 vaccine funding provided by the federal government. A little bit on assistance to restaurants and retailers. We know that many of our restaurants and retailers are planning for the fall and winter months and how they're going to continue to operate outdoors. The county is going to be supporting those efforts. We'll be allowing tents for outdoor dining. Retailers and any business that wishes to operate outside will be allowed to do so. We're asking that establishments register with the Department of Permitting Services, but this is important. We will not be issuing permits, not charging a fee, but we'll be sending out staff members to ensure that all tents are erected properly. So we're going to do what we can to make sure this process is expedited and doesn't go through what we would normally do if we were permitting something. We'll post flyers on the proper procedures for tents and outdoor heating equipment on our website. Also, outdoor tents, outdoor heating equipment, and outdoor furniture are all eligible for reimbursement under our Reopen Montgomery grant program. An establishment can receive up to $5,000, and information can be found on our Biz Resources webpage. COVID-19 rent relief program. Rent relief continues to be an issue, and I want to encourage residents to apply for a rent relief program. There's still time to do so. The program provides short-term rental assistance to eligible households who have lost income due to COVID-19 and caused them to fall behind on the rent. The program will provide up to $4,000 to eligible households to cover the cost for back rent or for rent credit for future months. Information about the program is available also on our website. Voting on elections, we're a little over a month away from Election Day. We've been encouraging people to vote by mail, and the response has been tremendous. If you have not returned your application to vote by mail, please do so as soon as possible. Important, when you are requesting a mail-in ballot, choose the by mail US mail, not the internet email option. For voters who choose to or must vote in person, early voting will run October 26th through November 2nd. If you vote in person, we encourage you to vote early to minimize the lines. Make sure you're wearing a mask and that you social distance. On Election Day, voters can cast ballots in place at early voting center or public high school, but there will not be the usual 200 voting sites on Election Day. So do not assume that you're going to go to where you've always voted. There are limited voting centers. There will be 39 voting centers around the county, and a resident can vote at any one of the voting centers. So you can now vote at the most convenient voting center, whether it's in your district or not. So wherever you are, we're making this as simple as possible. If you haven't registered, the deadline is October 13th. This week, ballot boxes were installed around the county. Drop box information, installation date, and locations will be included when you receive your mail-in ballot. So there are places where you can just drop off your ballot. So that's another option to going out to the actual polling place. The census deadline, there's been a lot of discussion about the census, the last day and the last day to submit your census form. The date was today, but it's been extended to October 5th. And there's some question about what will be the final ruling from a judge involved in this case. If you've not filled out your form, please do so. It is important. County revenues, particularly from the state and the federal government, as well as apportionment in the state legislature, is dependent on the accuracy of these results. So there's a lot of money at stake. If everybody doesn't get counted, that means formulas that are population-based will result in us not getting the resources that we need and that we should have. So please register for the census. And remember, if you're concerned about the question the president at one point wanted to put on the census form, that question never made it there. It is completely safe to register for the census. So please do that. Lastly, I want to remind people that we have an operating budget meeting tonight. and it's available on Zoom again, and it starts at 7 p.m. And it's a virtual meeting, and details and how to participate are on the county website. And it will be today at 7 o'clock. And one of the things we've done different with our budget meetings this year and last year was usually these budget meetings were held after the county's budget was developed. We decided it might be more useful to get folks' input by having the budget meetings before we develop the budget. So that's why they're early last year and early this year. And that will stay that way. And with all that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gales.
Excuse me. Good afternoon and happy Wednesday, everybody. I hope everyone's continuing to stay safe. Couple of things. First, get your flu shot. So as a friendly weekly reminder, if you haven't got your flu shot already, please do so for you and your family as soon as you can. We also want to send a reminder out for parents for their children who, again, even though they are not physically in the school setting, it is important for them to get their vaccines updated for general health, but certainly when we are able to move back in terms of kids returning to school full time, they will need those vaccines to be completed. So why wait? We encourage you to utilize your healthcare provider, as well as the number of county sites we have at our Dennis Avenue Health Center, our Germantown County Health Center, and we will be working to utilize the Rocking Horse Center, hopefully within the next several weeks, to offer opportunities for folks to get those vaccines updated for their children. I do want to make a comment related to testing. I saw a story that depicted our call for folks to get tested as a reference to beg people to come in so data points can improve. Let me be very clear. Our recommendations and encouragement for individuals to get tested is for the safety of the general population. It's for the safety of the individual. It's also for the safety of their families and any other individuals that they may come into contact with in terms of knowing your status. Data points are data points that we put out there. But again, our motivation and encouragement for individuals to get tested, whether you're symptomatic or asymptomatic, particularly if you are a known contact of someone else who has tested positive, we encourage people to do that for their health and for the broader health of the community. I also wanted to make a brief comment for folks at home. Recently, there were a number of announcements talking about the allocation and presence of rapid tests. I think the federal government announced that they have approximately somewhere between 125 and 150 million rapid tests that they would be deploying to states. We don't have any further information about that allocation and those resources at this time. And when we do, we will work to figure out how we can best utilize those resources to create testing opportunities for our jurisdiction. From my understanding, the effort is to increase testing access for children and staff to be able to go back to school. But at this time, we don't have any further information in terms of how that program will be administered and how those particular resources will be allocated. I do also want to give a heads up that we have met to come up with Halloween guidance, since that seems to be an important question that lots of people have been asking over the last couple of weeks, and we certainly know that moving towards the end of October will be on your radar. So we plan to release that information, hopefully within the next several days, to make available for folks in terms of guidance around safe practices for those who observe that particular holiday. I will stop there, but leave room for happy to answer any questions at the conclusion of the presentations. Thank you.
Dr. Earl Stoddard, your turn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming back and hearing from us. I want to talk a little bit more about the alcohol beverage service permit that will be utilized for the late night restaurant program. So this is going to be a very similar process to what restaurants are already familiar with via the temporary business modification application and the carry-out delivery permission application that we've already launched, as well as the temporary consumption area approval process. So basically, we already have a few COVID-related permits that allow for expansion of restaurants outdoors, expansion of delivery and carry-out services. They are very quick. They are meant to be a very quick turnaround. So what will happen is they go to the website. It should be up today. We'll actually be able to apply before council has acted tomorrow. As soon as council has acted tomorrow, we will hit the approval for those eligible businesses to proceed. A few of the requirements include, this is actually based on a proposal that was submitted to us by the Bethesda Chamber of Commerce in concert with several other restaurants, particularly several of the Wheaton and Silver Spring area restaurants who got together with the Bethesda Chamber and submitted a proposal with some standards in there. The only additional thing that we added was something that was suggested during our call with our restaurants, was that they would commit to having a specific staff person on duty or available who would be monitoring during the hours that we're concerned about the implementation of the physical distancing, face cover wearing, and other guidelines set forth in the executive order. And so they'll have extra staff person who's just an extra eyes on. We'll provide secondary enforcement to make sure that the things are supposed to be happening. And we outline basically that this program allows us to, we put it out there. We're going to put some parameters in the executive order around, conditions where we would say we're going to rescind this program, or places where if we see violations, what the consequence of those violations are, including removal of this particular permit and going further into the alcohol sales or food service licensure, or large fines up to $20,000 if necessary. We expect that the vast majority of businesses who apply for this program will do exactly what they're supposed to do, just as that many of them were before we took back the alcohol the rules to 10 p.m. But we do expect that there will be potential for some businesses to miss the mark, and we want to make sure that we have a significant enough consequence for us to be able to remove them from this program very quickly if we find that there are a handful of restaurants who are unable to meet the standards. The only other thing I want to touch on is we continue to do a lot in the food arena, and I think this has not gotten as much airtime as I think it could. We are seeing some troubling changes at the federal level. A good example of this is the USDA has been providing us produce boxes for the better part of several months, and we very much appreciated their support. We had been averaging somewhere between 23 and 26,000 food boxes a week. That has been cut down to 3,000 to 4,000 food boxes a week. Obviously, that is a dramatic difference in our available resources. The county will continue to try and offset this loss. But obviously, as people's economic conditions are continuing to be problematic, this reduction is incredibly troubling to us, and one for which we are concerned about what this will mean as we go into the fall and winter months, and what that may mean for people who are continuing to experience hunger throughout the winter months. And so we're going to continue to address this problem, but it's one that we're becoming increasingly concerned about given the shift in support that we've seen from external partners. And we want to make sure that, we continue to emphasize how important this is to our residents and keeping them safe and healthy and fed. So I'll stop there.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen. And we have some questions here on the chat box. First goes to Jordan Lindsay with My MCM Media, who has questions for both Dr. Gales and the county executive.
Thank you, and thank you guys so much for hosting this briefing. I just wanted to ask, as we enter the winter and fall months, how has the county prepared if there is a spike in COVID cases, specifically regarding the metric on the utilization of hospital acute care beds? Will the number of hospital beds increase or capacity increase?
So thank you for your question. I'll start in terms of preparedness. So we have continued to bolster our infrastructure, which is what we have been doing from the very beginning of the pandemic response, in terms of making sure that we have adequate provisions for the whole host of different components of the response. So including ensuring that we have adequate capacity to test, adequate capacity to conduct contact tracing, adequate necessary outreach to our congregate living spaces such as nursing homes and assisted living facilities, as well as constant communication with our hospitals and health system partners. And so we continue to have those pieces in place and continue to support those efforts, because we know that regardless if it's a spike or just a sustained response effort, that those components are critical to moving forward and having a good response. Now, as it specifically relates to hospital capacity, the metrics that we have utilized on our dashboard have not changed. They are still important measures. and proxies to determine the full impact and burden of the virus, particularly as proxies for severity of illness. And as you mentioned, we have a host of those metrics on our site, including the percentage of hospital beds in use, the percentage of hospital beds used for COVID-19, the percentage of ICU utilization, as well as the percentage of ventilators in use and other critical care equipment. The other measure that I want to draw attention to is we don't just rely on hospital-based measures, we also look at some clinical variables such as the number of COVID-like illnesses or COVID visits to the emergency room, again, as another proxy to see what the impact of the virus is and approximate utilization trends. So we will continue to follow those measures and metrics, in addition to continuing to follow the case count and the test positivity rates to demonstrate if there is a peak happening. Now, one of the challenges that we have is not only do we have the challenge of reporting the daily numbers, we have to sit and also look at the trends to predict when that might happen. And so sometimes, for example, as the county executive mentioned, numbers may look great, but we also look at them in the larger context to see if we see any upticks or try to see if we notice any trends to predict or give evidence that we might be looking at a significant uptick in cases so we can plan appropriately. Some of the contingency strategies that we have in place, for example, when looking at hospital utilization, as you recall, back in April and May, the hospitals had extensive plans in place. They continue to have those plans in place that look at how they can repurpose their facilities and their floor space based upon the trends that they're seeing in the community. So in summary, we are continuing to do what we have been working on for the last 7 months and continuing to look at strategies to increase and expand those efforts. I feel confident that we will have we will be in a better position now to respond to a spike or an increase in cases than where we were in February and March, simply because we do have increased institutional knowledge, we do have increased experience, and we've had an opportunity to build and bolster our infrastructure for our response.
And I would only add, in April, actually, we made the move to acquire 50 hospital-grade ventilators. Those arrived over the summer. And so those will be in place and give us a capacity to support our hospitals through a deployment strategy, should that become necessary in the fall in a way that would not have been possible in the early spring. And so we've been very proactive about making sure that we increase both our supplies. I had a conversation with, I continue to talk to our hospitals, to talk to them as most recently as Friday. And so we continue to talk to them, make sure that we're all prepared and that we have resources that we can support them with throughout this fall and winter period.
I'll just add that, we made a decision in the beginning that we would accumulate enough supplies for a second surge, that we were not going to go into the fall and wait for a surge to happen and then be scrambling around like everybody had to scramble around last time. So we've been buying and making sure that we've got supplies on hand so that we can handle this. And I think we're in a lot better position than we were when this began.
Jordan, did you have an additional question for the county executive?
No, I didn't. Thank you so much. That was great.
Okay, super. Chris Gordon, NBC4, with questions for all three officials. Unmute, Chris. There you go.
All right, thank you very much. For the county executive, I would like any reaction you might have to the announcement that ICE is planning to increase enforcement in sanctuary cities. I know you've said Montgomery County is not a sanctuary county, but it appears the administration is treating it as one. So I would like your reaction to that. And for Dr. Gales and Dr. Stoddard, when might schools, what's the thinking or the criteria necessary for schools to reopen in person?
So I guess, I haven't heard that we were on the list. I saw a few jurisdictions mentioned, and the ones I saw did not mention Montgomery County, but they will not get any cooperation from us if this is what they attempt to do. It's morally wrong, it's repugnant, it's counter to our values in this county. And they'll, I don't control what the federal government does, but I do control what we do in response to it, and they will not be getting any help.
And the question on school reopening for Dr. Gales and Dr. Studdard.
Well, I think the criteria that for schools to reopen have been laid out from a number of sources. The state provided guidance in August with measures related to test positivity as well as cases per 100,000. And the CDC on a couple of weeks ago released more specific guidelines that looked at a host of measures, including test positivity cases, and also including metrics around hospitalization, utilization rates, and those kind of things. Now, when you look at the measures, for example, when you look at the state criteria, we have not met both criteria for full in-person schooling for Montgomery County. And that was based upon a test positivity rate below 5 and a cases per 100,000 below 5 as well. And when you look at the CDC metrics that have been put out a couple weeks ago, there are a number of categories where we do fall into the lower or low transmission category, risk of transmission, but there still are a few others where we fall into moderate to high risk of transmission. So putting that all together, looking at both the state and the CDC guidelines that have been put forward, we as a jurisdiction do not meet the full criteria to reopen for full in-person schooling. And we still await a definition of what hybrid classroom and hybrid instruction means from the state. But we will continue to work with our non-public schools. As we have mentioned a number of times, we have had a number of teleconferences where we've talked through technical assistance and issues that they faced. And we also continue to work with our partners in the Montgomery County Public Schools to provide guidance as they continue to look for and explore opportunities for their larger community, as well as potential opportunities to bring back students on a smaller scale within the next several months.
I would simply add, I know this is absolutely a Board of Education decision on how they want to move forward. We've been meeting with them regularly, as Dr. Gales alluded to give them our best advice on how to safely move forward. What I would anticipate seeing as they work through the processes for how to make spaces safely is that they'll start small and expand out from there. I would anticipate that you're going to see some programming in the second quarter, limited to begin with, as I said, but then expanding outwards from there and then seeing how things go. Obviously, I think that they're planning and they want the metrics to be in a good place for them to be able to move forward with that. I think I think this has been lost in some of this conversation. Dr. Gales, the MCPS, and everyone believes that in-school opportunities are the best form of education. They're an important conduit for other access to other services. We want those to be possible, particularly for the students who need them most, which are our special education, our ESOL, our younger learners, those who are struggling with remote education, for example. And so obviously we're going to look to try and support opportunities to expand those as the data permits and as they can find comfortable, safe opportunities that think about the safety of students, faculty, and staff as well.
And did you say second quarter of this fall semester?
Yeah, that's what they're discussing. I mean, to be clear, this is a Board of Education decision. We are supporting them in how they endeavor to do this. They have a lot of conversations to talk to parents, to talk to faculty, to talk to staff. And I don't want to foreclose that those discussions are going to, but they'd like to have opportunities for the second quarter if the data and the conditions will support them in doing that. And the board supports that as well. That those are decisions they have to make. But I think those are that's certainly things that they're discussing they'd like to have in place should it allow them to do so.
Scott Broom from WUSA 9 would like to ask a question to the county executive about voting rights.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Mr. County Exec, since you talked voting rights briefly, this question seems okay today. Last night, the president, as he's done repeatedly, has talked about this. We want to have people watch the polls very carefully. It's unclear to me whether Maryland jurisdictions are going to be a target for any of that or not, but it's on my radar today. And I just wonder, if such a thing occurred in Montgomery County, do you have any reactions or thoughts about how the county may or may not react, or any suggestions on how the state might react if something like that occurred?
I mean, there are totally legal ways for people to do poll watching. So, no one's going to interfere with people exercising their right. That's why you've got judges. That's why you've got observers. So whatever they do within the law, they're free to do, and that which they if they try to exceed it, they will not get any, they won't be allowed to. It is unfortunate that, he continues to try to discredit this election, and I guess assume that anybody voting against him must somehow not be entitled to vote. An interesting perspective on elections. But it is what it is. You just got to deal with them.
Were you committed to having the police department to respond to any complaints about so-called aggressive poll watching, whatever that may be?
If there's any harassment or aggressive behavior toward individuals, we'll put a stop to it.
And I do know, so we had a meeting with our local board on Monday. We're discussing things around health and safety. There is certainly interest from the Board of Elections on opportunities for having in-person monitoring of both the ballot opening that will occur as well as the ballot counting process. And they're looking for opportunities to allow, with physical distance and face coverings, those activities to proceed. In addition, they're integrating the use of cameras to allow for a real-time broadcasting of the process as well. So you can have both the balance of some in-person with safe conditions, as well as remote viewing of the ballot collection and counting process. We 100% agree that the integrity of this election has, the president has called it into question. And we want to try and give as much confidence to Montgomery County voters that we're going to be above board in how this process is operated, and give opportunities to allow for people to observe that.
Okay. Tisha Lewis, Fox 5 DC, would like to ask a question. Tisha, your question, and who is it for?
Hi there, it's Tisha with Fox 5, and my question specifically is to the county executive and also Dr. Gales. Wanted to know, what are the specific metrics that are being used to determine Montgomery County not moving into phase 3? Because we're seeing businesses closing, we're seeing restaurants closing and struggling. So what can you tell them in terms of these specific metrics that you're looking at and are being used to stay in phase 2?
I'll be happy to say. How would you like to respond, County Executive?
Go for it. I'll fill in any blanks.
We've been very consistent with the metrics that we're following from the very beginning. We have a dashboard that shows consistent numbers and metrics across a host of different categories. We have been working to simplify those to present to the public, but they are based upon our hospital utilization trends, our daily case counts, our test positivity rates, our contact tracing. Again, I think there's 12 or 13 different measures that are included on the dashboard. And so when folks say, well, why aren't we moving forward and, in terms of moving to phase 3, as the county executive laid out in his opening statement, we are looking at higher case averages now than where we were in June when we moved to phase 2. So from our perspective, it's important to demonstrate. And again, I know lots of people have asked, well, what's the specific number? There is no specific number per se, but there's principles. And we've been very clear and very intentional about talking about levels of community transmission. We're looking at moderate transmission versus lower transmission. By CDC guidelines, moderate transmission fits somewhere between 30 to 35 cases on a daily basis. Lower transmission is much lower, somewhere in high single digits to the low teens. It's important to talk about that in context, because when you have demonstrated at minimum moderate transmission, you are decreasing the likelihood that an individual walks into your business, walks into your school, walks into your gym, walks into your church, walks into your entertainment venue, bringing the virus into that space, making it easier for it to transmit to other people. We simply still have higher rates of transmission in the community, and we've not seen them come down since we opened up to phase 2. What we're trying to get folks to understand is, and what it's difficult, it's very hard actually for those of us in public health to see businesses close and see things. Our heart breaks for that. Our heart breaks when we don't see kids being able to go back to school. Our heart breaks when we hear people having stress because they can't get out to see family members. Our heart breaks when we see difficulties in terms of higher rates of cases in certain communities. But the reality is that's not something that we are arbitrarily deciding. We're looking at the data and we're looking at the trends and looking at the impact of the virus on our community. Let's keep in mind the COVID-19 virus has caused this pandemic, and we're sympathetic to those issues. But we also have a job, and our job is to keep people safe. And when we're looking at data to determine and show that certain activities are higher risk or moving forward in terms of increasing access and increasing capacity pose a risk to our constituents and folks in our jurisdiction, we have a job and responsibility to provide that guidance to the policymakers, the elected officials, in terms of guiding and putting forward the advice in terms of how to move forward. So that may be a longer answer that didn't provide a specific number, but again, we're sticking to what we have said all along. And if anything we're guilty of, it's being a broken record, because we continue to say the same things in terms of our principles. Now, we do recognize that it is sometimes tricky to follow along at home to say, well, is this measure, did we hit it this date versus that date? And we are working internally to draft up a better representation of that information on our dashboard, so it's more easily digestible at home and folks have a better understanding of how we're making decisions to move forward. Or if unfortunately our numbers go in another direction, that we would have to potentially walk back some of those provisions.
So I'll just add to that, and Dr. Gales touched on this. To me, the most important of the metrics is the positivity rate. That gives us an idea of what's the likelihood of coming across people who are positive, but also the case rate per 100,000, because that tells you how many cases, or gives you a sense of how many cases are out there in the community. And when I keep producing anywhere from say 65 to 100 cases on any given day, that means that 65 to 100 people ran into somebody else who had COVID and gave it to them, and they most likely didn't know they ran into a person who had COVID and gave it to them. And so when you see numbers like that, it tells you that this virus is still circulating out in the community in people who you don't necessarily know have it. And that's one of the great dangers. And I wish that when people ask us about this question, they'd consider that everybody is, at least the medical professionals who are actual medical professionals, have said that that spike 2 is very likely. Some places referring it to third spike. This country is already seeing spikes. Now the big spike is in the Midwest, so they're getting another increase. And Europe is seeing spikes. And even places like New York are beginning to see spikes, and they drove their numbers way, way down. So there is absolutely no certainty that just because our numbers are better than the worst numbers we had in this whole thing, that makes it safe to open. It just means that it's being better managed than it was before. But the virus, with absent treatments and absent the vaccine, we're going to have to do what we can to minimize the contacts that people have. And short of shutting everything down, which we did not do, but I will say other jurisdictions went farther than we did in this, we know that every time we open something up, it introduces a level of risk. But people are going to go grocery shopping, and people are going to go to drugstores, and we established early on there were essential businesses. So there's an expectation that people are going to go out and do things. We have tried to open things up as carefully as we can, and not just simply say, well, you did this, let's do the next thing. And I think, one of the things I keep in mind is a comment made by one of the governor's aides when asked about, a complaint that some of us had about why did you open something? And the response was, well, just because we opened it up doesn't mean we think people should go there. You send a really different message when you open it up. It's like saying it's okay to go there. So, we're trying to keep as much control on this as we possibly can. And as Dr. Gale said, when our numbers come down, we'll handle that. We are continually looking for what we can do different. And you'll see our program with the restaurants as an indication of our trying to find a way to see if there's a safe way to let them further open. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. County Executive. Kevin Lewis with ABC7 has a question for you, Mr. County Executive.
Hey there, County Executive. I'll just start by sharing that your call for folks to get tested and asymptomatic folks led me to get tested on Friday, and I got my results in a day and a half and found the process to be nice and smooth. So
Good.
figured you'd like that feedback.
I'm hoping you were negative too.
It's an important question. Yes, I was negative. So anyhow, that though, I'm sure you watched the debates last night, and I'm sure you heard that President Trump took aim at Democratic cities, saying that it was his opinion that some of them are slow to reopen for political purposes. And I just wanted to get your feedback on those assertions that were made.
So I did hear that. I didn't listen to the whole debate because it made me sick. I've never seen a debate like that in my entire life. That wasn't a debate when you get to scream over somebody else talking and interject to make sure they don't answer a question. But whatever it wasn't a debate. But that comment is just like that. First place, I'm in a blue state. So there's no advantage to doing this, inflicting this pain here in a blue state for a political outcome, because it's not going to change the political outcome in this state. He's not going to win this state. And we don't need to make people miserable to try to get that outcome. The only reason we're doing what we're doing is for health reasons. And as a politician, I wish the businesses were open, because open businesses, A, have more employment, which means more income taxes that we collect. And B, if they're open, I get more property taxes because I don't have people reassessing their property because of vacancies. It is not in my interest to shut things down. I get no benefit from this whatsoever. The county doesn't benefit one iota. That's why we wish this thing were over. This is why we're trying to keep a lid on it, so we don't have to walk things back and further shut things down. So, the president's got his fantasies. I deal in the real world. I'll leave it at that.
And I add one thing to that, because as a public health professional watching the debate, last night's comment on the debate was not the only time where we've had this larger issue where public health activities have been politicized. Let me be very clear for the folks who are part of the Montgomery County Public Health Services team and our team. We may have our own personal political affiliations or activities that we do in our own time. But when we are working on behalf of the county residents, we are not working for a political party. We are not working for a particular political ideology. We're working to enforce guidelines and put forth guidance and advice that will keep our residents safe. And that has been our guiding principle and will continue to be our guiding principle in terms of the advice we put forward and the types of resources and mechanisms we put into place to keep our residents safe.
Donna St. George from the Washington Post has a couple of questions for you, Dr. Gales.
Thanks so much. Dr. Gales, I wanted to ask some questions about schools. I was first interested in whether you could update us on how many schools have been the focus of health department investigations since mid-August when the Bullis case surfaced, and also whether you could talk a little bit about how many people tested positive or were quarantined in the case that you have recently described as an extensive case in a non-public school. And then thirdly, I just wondered if you could tell us why the county is not naming the schools where positive cases are being found, because there are a lot of people interested in knowing which schools those are.
Well, Donna, thank you for your questions. And I know you have submitted some questions over email that I have not had an opportunity to answer. So I actually, in preparation, when I saw that you were going to ask some questions, I pulled those up, and hopefully my response will capture and answer those questions in addition to the ones that you've put forward today. So since in mid-August that you mentioned, we, with the particular cases at Bullis, we have seen we've had approximately over 50 contact investigations regarding schools. The overwhelming majority of them have been non-public schools. There have been a couple of instances where there have been affiliated with MCPS staff. But what is different again is that the schools where staff members have tested positive, there's not been any school students back in those buildings or any concern for any type of student exposure within the academic setting. And since our last council briefing on last Tuesday, Tuesday of last week, we have seen approximately, I think, 24 additional contact investigations regarding schools. 14 of those, if I counted correctly, have turned out to be negative cases. They were involving COVID-like illnesses reported in students, staff, and or teachers. And in 10 of those, they have actually involved a case that has confirmed positive, and there's been some aspects of quarantining. Now, I don't have the full breakdown. I'll have to go through the numbers and get those to you separately offline. But again, the majority of those cases have been in non-public school settings. We have actually had a conversation with the state to talk about how the data will be presented publicly. I'm sure you, as well as others on the call, remember the issues that we had around publicizing or putting forth the nursing home and assisted living facility data. And the state did do that. We've asked the state if they're going to do that for schools. My impression is that there is not an inclination to do so. We have been discussing locally how best to represent that data, and we have a couple people on our team working to build some type of interface to collect the data and be able to present that in a more comprehensive manner. We certainly have our internal information and internal spreadsheets that we follow and databases. And so we're still working through that. A large part of why we decide what to put public versus not is it's about privacy and completion of investigation. If there is a time where we need to publicize information that would allow for better incorporation into our investigations, we've not hesitated to do so. We also work to protect the privacy of any individuals involved. And so when there isn't a need to publicize that information, we haven't run to do so. And that's a principle that we followed back then with nursing homes, and we continue to follow now as it relates to schools and settings. So I also I know that in some of your questions, you also mentioned that, asked about parents not cooperating in investigations. Let me be clear, the overwhelming majority of parents, students, staff, and schools have been cooperative when we have needed to contact them for contact investigation purposes. And in terms of adhering to guidelines, there have been a small number of instances where parents have refused to participate in those follow-up interviews and have also called into question the guidance that has been provided by the health department staff in terms of their children or them needing to quarantine based upon their understanding and interpretation of risk of exposure. But the overwhelming majority have been helpful and have participated in that process. So I think that covers your questions today, as well as the questions that you sent via email. And certainly if there are any follow-up questions, we'll be happy to work with you to provide the data for your purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gales. Brianna Adikusuma from the Bethesda Beat has a question for Dr. Stoddard. Brianna?
Yeah, thank you, and good pronunciation on the last name. Yeah, so Dr. Stoddard, I just wanted to get some clarification on the alcohol permit that is expected to be approved. I know you said that people with violations won't be allowed to get the permit. Is that including all violations under, COVID-related regulations or specific ones? And if someone has had a violation, will there be any opportunity in the future, or is there anything they can do to be able to get one down the road? And for people with the permits, will there be warnings, or on the first violation, you get your permit taken away?
So in short, there was one area of violations that we are not going to consider to be an exclusionary purpose, and that was for the music violations. There was some confusion about that early on with what was allowed and what was not allowed. We did issue some warnings and citations early on for music, but now, now that we've allowed indoor dining, we always thought it was rather confusing. We were enforcing the state order at the time. We're not going to consider the music violations to be a rationale for what we're really concerned about is the businesses so whenever we issued a citation, we almost, in every case so far, we've issued a warning previous to it, meaning that there are locations that have received warnings and then subsequent citations for physical distancing requirements, face coverings, too many people at tables, things where we've previously warned them about the rules and they've been then subsequently cited. If they have been previously cited, we're making them ineligible at the start of this program. What we will likely do after the first rush is we will review on a case-by-case basis those businesses who apply, who have a previous violation, and determine whether, based on their compliance since the violation, basically we just need to take each of those on a case-by-case basis and determine whether we'll allow them to move forward. There are a handful of businesses for whom there have been multiple citations issued, and I think those are the ones where we have the most concern about giving them more allowances when the allowances that they've had so far have been inappropriately implemented. And so I think those are the ones where we have the most concerns about ever, expanding the program. Now, never say never. We'll continue to review, and we always look for, new opportunities and guidelines, and continue to have conversations even with businesses that we've previously cited. And so I don't want to say never, but certainly those are the ones where we have the most concern about being lenient in a case where we're concerned about the program overall.
Do you know how many are on that list?
I do not have a number offhand. It's probably a dozen or so. We could get some more information. It's essentially the businesses that we've cited for social distancing or physical distancing and face coverings, which is probably in the area of 12 to 15 is my guess.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, this is a briefing for members of the media, and those are the questions that we are answering this afternoon. One last follow-up question from Scott Broom from WUSA 9. Scott, do you want to pose a question, or do you want me to read it?
No, it's just trying to clarify with Dr. Stoddard what he told me about the cameras. Is that an approved plan? It's going to happen, and are there cameras outside any other places?
I believe the cameras. Yeah, I believe the cameras are there. I believe there are 4 cameras trained in the counting room at the Board of Elections. I can confirm that with you, Scott, and we can follow up offline. But I believe that is an approved element of the plan. What is being contemplated is how to do the actual physical monitoring. I know there are elements of that for the de-enveloping process for mail-in ballots that they've talked through about how much spacing that there will be and things like that. But I think that where the question is still at, and the board is trying to decide, is in the actual Board of Elections where the counting is being done. They'll have the cameras, but how many people they'll allow, or if they'll allow people to monitor that process, because frankly, I think their biggest concern is the Board of Elections is an incredibly busy facility with a lot of moving of physicals, and there's forklifts and other things like that. And so they just want to be able to have a safe process whereby they can consider observance, but that's what's being discussed with the Board of Elections.
Okay, if I put a line together on it, I'll send you an email to confirm it, and I'll also talk with the Board of Elections to get squared away. I just don't want to report it unless I'm absolutely sure it's a done deal. So I'll email the board and try to get a statement from them as well. So thank you, appreciate it.
All righty then. Well, thank you. Any more questions from the journalists, members of the media? Going once, going twice. All right, I think that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Have a safe and great afternoon. Thank you.